Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Fewell Innovation 10th Anniversary Executive Speaker Series. It's a bit of a mouthful. I'm here with my colleague and friend, Ely Ross. Say hi to everybody, Eli.
Hey, everybody.
And I'm really excited to sit down and chat with Eli on the topic of transformational leadership. This is a topic that we knew we wanted to explore during our speaker series this year. And I had the privilege of having a front row seat to watching Eli do some constructively disruptive things at the Washington, D.C. public schools system. So let me first invite Eli here to, could you, for the viewers, just give a quick executive summary about some of your adventures in DC government that led to the public schools gig?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, I'm really excited to be with you today. It means a lot that you would reach out and ask. So thank you so much. And it's fun to spend some time with you. So for me, I've held a myriad of careers. It's one of the fun things about, loving challenges. You always look for one and you find one. But, you know, uh, beginning, I was a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, got out, became an attorney, practiced for several years, and got roped into local politics in Washington, D.C., where I was really fortunate to join Mayor Bowser as her director of Veterans Affairs back in 2016. And so from there, I was able to build a number of, great programs, popped over to Department of Parks and Recreation as the chief of staff. And then also when COVID hit, worked in the Emergency Operations Center, battling COVID and everything in between. And then popped over to DCPS, where I served as the chief operating officer for several years. And so I love a good challenge, and I love being able to build great systems and programs that really benefit as many people as possible. And so that's been a real through line of my career, is that motivation of helping people.
Yeah, that's important to know your why. And for for a lot of people who go into civil service, it's easy to get connected to the mission. Each one of those gigs sounded very compelling and very motivating and inspiring. But what's interesting is that government, even local government, is not known for change, and yet there's something about your destiny that has led you to roles where change was either necessary, even though it was part of the mandate, or change was the mandate in itself. Talk about how your journey looks a lot different than the stereotype of what it means to be a government administrator.
Yeah, I think government overall has really earned its reputation for not being a place for innovation. Um, but I think the District of Columbia government is unique in that we're both a city, a state, a county, depending on your perspective. And so innovation is something that I think we're capable of. Emergency Operations Center, we ended up setting up a warehouse that delivered Uber style services for homebound seniors. And it was an idea that went from, concept to implementation. In about 72 hours, we were standing up a warehouse, receiving goods, putting meals in bags. And then, because all of our pools were closed, we had lifeguards and other individuals that, didn't have anywhere to report, delivering meals to homebound seniors across the district in a pretty short amount of time. And that sort of snowballed into, we set up, meal distribution sites across the city, about 2 weeks later that were happening, every 2 days. So we were able to help, thousands of families. One of the things we did is we pivoted, right when we came back from, COVID, to offering in-person services where we modified our summer camps to be learning loss camps, so that we called them boost camps. So you were getting the summer camp experience, but also high impact tutoring. Eliminated our backlog of civil rights investigations, talking like, you know, about 700 cases, at any one point in time.
All right, let's get
Yeah.
into it. Let's talk about Eli's toolkit. So
Toolkit.
you get into a gig, and whether you see the reality on the ground or you've been told the reality is, you mentioned the COVID emergency response. You've mentioned a transformational mandate at public schools. Uh, what are some of the first few moves
Mhm.
that come to your mind that are your go-to moves, your tips, hacks for
Yeah.
people that need to make some change?
Yeah. Step one, get an honest assessment of where you are, of what's working, what isn't working, what are the resource gaps, what are the knowledge gaps, what are the human talent gaps. Be honest.
What's number two?
Number two is define a strategy. You've got to define where it is that you're going, and it's got to be something that is easily communicated
Mm.
from yourself to the mayor to the first person that's walking in the door as a new employee, and beyond anything, it's got to really resonate with your stakeholders of this is where we're headed. So you got to build that strategy of where it is that you want to go. And in that, you've really got to define for everybody. And you said this earlier, it's why you're a brilliant individual and I love working with you. Uh, you've got to know the why. Why is this important? And why do we need to do it? Why do we need to change? You've got to be able to address that. And it's got to be readily apparent with everybody on your team.
Yeah. So step one, an honest and truthful assessment of the current state. Step two, a strategy that is viral, that can be repeated by everybody at every level.
Hmm.
And then one more.
One more, and this is where I get to nerd out. Your strategy has got to live in your budget, and it has to
Oh,
be resourced appropriately. We could sit there. The rest of this conversation can be held over like an Excel spreadsheet, but it's really important, and I think it's particularly important in the government that your strategy has to be appropriately resourced, and it has to live there. And so that way, if you're no longer there, or as you move on, those things that you have built live permanently in that budget, and people get to see the value, and you get to hold yourself accountable. Government organizations are held accountable by their budgets. And so if your strategy lives there, it means permanence and it means accountability.
three cool tools. And I'm wondering then if maybe you could give us a couple of examples. First, an honest assessment of the current state. A lot of leaders will jump into a situation, like they got their superhero cape on, they're ready to go, and they just know that everything's broken. And this is a lot of change champions disease, which is I can really only see what's broken.
Right.
Talk to me about how you're able to let go of your convictions to hear a truth that it runs counter to what you believe, when it's your people telling you this is the truth, as opposed to what you feel you see as the truth.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that every leader falls into the trap, be it on day one or 5 or 10 years in, of I'm always right. Um, and so you've got to have what I would call like a high sense of emotional intelligence, and of being able to read people and being able to read the situation. But this is what I do. When I come into an organization, I try to meet with as many people as I possibly can. Like my job for 30, 60, 90 days, is beating the streets, beating the pavement. When I took over at DCPS, we had 117 schools, 5 satellite facilities. I've got people in all of them. What am I doing? I'm spending the bulk of my time out of the office. And some of the most helpful discussion points for me that allowed me to like check my assumptions, to build my assumptions, to really sort of craft what we were going to be working on, happened in hallways. It was the employee saying, "You're the new chief operating officer. Did you know that we didn't have uniforms for all of, people in Division X?" Things like that. And that allows you to build trust by immediately going back and solving that problem. And then it lets you, because I'm a budget nerd, build a budget that actually delivers on both the daily operations that are needed and often overlooked, but then it also lets you build in those success points that you're talking to. And the last thing I'll say on this is because I'm an attorney at one point in my life, you know, you do all this research and they always tell you like, you found the answer when you continue to do research and come back to the same answer.
Yes.
And as
Yes.
you move through and talk to people, you ultimately will find yourself coming back to the same answer. And if it's your answer, great. And if it's not your answer, that's a good starting point to start asking some different questions.
Let's talk about a concrete example of the second tool that you mentioned, which is a strategy that is coherent, clear, and viral, contagious. Coherent, clear, and contagious. There, I just made that up. As somebody who came into your third or your fourth transformation gig, you've already built up some experiences of knowing what tool, process, or technique might be valuable. And yet, there's all the data that you just got from step one, listening to your people. Talk a little bit about how do you know when to apply something you've used before versus when to keep it in the bag, and when to listen to your team about a new technique that you don't know anything about.
Mm-hmm.
That balance of being the person who injects something new, but then also knowing when that's not the right thing or the right moment and when it is. That's a
Yeah.
tough line to walk. How have you done that?
There's some commonalities of active listening, beating the streets. Those are all things that I think always are going to suit you well to get as much information as possible. And I like to come with the same idea of like, I'm going to build structure. You can look at 5 different buildings and they all look different on the outside, but they all have some commonalities on the inside. They got a strong foundation. They've got strong steel beams. Like there are commonalities that you're looking at. And so what I try to do is I want to build systems and processes that allow our people and our teams to be successful. But then I want to allocate resources towards those core problems that are preventing them from realizing their success on their current state. At DCPS, we had to build something because I had 1,200 employees and contractors dispersed across the city. How do you build something that everybody can buy into? So we built like a really quick, down and dirty strategic plan. Like I joined in November and we said, this is going to be our 18-month strategic plan. It's going to
Okay.
get us through the rest of this school year and it's going to get us through next school year. So we all know where we're marching. And it was all about laying a strong foundation. And we went through and we set out what our leadership principles were, what our core objectives were, what our mission was. And then we cascaded that down from me all the way down to the newest employee coming through the door. So everybody knew where they lived in there. And then we overlaid that strategy, like 3 big things that we're doing, but we overlaid it with an objective and key results methodology so
That's
that
what I was
everybody
looking for.
knew. I
That's
knew
what I
you
was
were waiting for it, which is why I was going to deliver. But like put that objective like and key results methodology in, so everybody knows what they're doing and they know what you care about as the leader.
Yeah. That's an example of bringing a technique into an environment that needs some structure, but then the content that goes inside that is one
Mhm.
where, as a leader, we can be open and responsive to what our team is telling us is necessary in the way of and what's possible. We can inspire and challenge about what's possible, but that framework, another one that you use, what was interesting, another one of the toolkits that you or the strategic elements that you came in was talking about, hey team, that we do a lot of professional development for teachers. When's the last time the administrators had any professional development? And it had been a minute.
Mhm.
And you asked them, what's the one thing that you want to learn how to do? And the answer came back was,
They wanted to be an agile like organization and scrum masters,
Agile project management of all the
which is
things.
like our origin story.
Yeah. So project management skills, you wouldn't necessarily think that that's what people on the ground are really wanting to learn how to do, but a strategy framework like OKRs, a project management skill set, which includes techniques like Agile, Scrum, and whatnot. Um, what it sounds like that the OKRs was something you brought to the table. The
Mhm.
project management was the thing that they asked for you to add in the mix. Is that a fair way to blend the strategy, the sources of
It's
your strategy?
it's absolutely correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of the me as a leader introducing some techniques and some strategic elements top down, but there's also some space for the team to say, hey, but we also need this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so then that brings us to the third one, the budget. And I think everybody, I'm working with another government agency right now that's saying that, we have more demand than we've ever had before. So obviously the answer is we have to have more headcount than we've ever had before. Um, Give us an example of how you were to make bricks without straw. How were you able to get results without going back to the bank every single time?
There's this old adage of that even the Marine Corps uses, and it's here, it's on video. Everybody, you go to war with the army that you have, not the army you want. And so, a large part of leadership is getting the most out of your team initially. Of like, and that buy-in is really key, and it's really strong, and that is your greatest resource of people being motivated and being excited to come to the office. But you take it a step further, and to answer your question specifically, like how do you allocate resources and get more resources when you know that the resources are finite? And it's really important for you as the leader to have a strong understanding of what your resources are and then what your objectives are. And so if you are spending the bulk of your resources to service this one program that isn't leading to the results that you want, you've got to start asking some critical questions about, is that the right program? Is that the right service? What if I align my resources here and I'm able to outsource X that lets me reallocate those staff members towards something else and something new? That's how you build capacity. And so it's really about making hard decisions in the budget process about making sure that your goals are the right goals for the organization and that those goals are resourced for success and that success is defined appropriately.
If I were to put you on the spot, what's an example of a tough decision you had to make with the work that needed to be done with the resources that you had
Yeah.
in any one of those gigs?
Any one of those gigs, the one that always stands out to me is the Department of Parks and Recreation. We managed 1,000 acres, and we would balloon up, we would triple in size for summer, everything. I stepped into that role with a $2 million budget deficit, and it was November. The fiscal year had just started, people. How are we $2 million in the hole? And so uh, what was happening was we were a 7-day a week agency that wasn't funded for 7-day a week operations. And so we had to make some very critical decisions about what 7 days a week actually meant and for what and which business lines and how did we plan those out. And so what we recognized was when we were supporting events and organizations, across the district, our cost model wasn't allowing us to recoup that cost for overtime. So we changed our business model slightly to pass on as many costs as we could when the situation was appropriate. But we also started making really tough decisions about what it was, which events were core to our mission and what we were doing and how we were doing it. And so in that initial 6-month phase, I was nobody's friend. We would say, we are not giving this to you. We're not giving it for free. But if it falls within this core, like our core mission, we're absolutely there to support you. And so we really had to break a lot of bad habits, not just with our government partners, but with our stakeholders. But what it allowed us to do was get over that budget hurdle, recenter on our mission, but then also deliver additional value for our core stakeholders in a really short amount of time. And so that's one example. But you got to make tough decisions all the time. That's what happens in the budget process.
Let's dwell on that a little bit more because I'm talking with a lot of uh, these are junior executives, mid managers, whatever you want to call them, who are feeling the pressure of disappointing stakeholders, customers, and constituents. You mentioned the line, I was nobody's friend
Mhm.
when it was time to reset expectations. And so I'm talking to a lot of junior executives, middle managers who are really just struggling with that because they feel it's their mission to deliver
Mhm.
on mission. It's their mandate to deliver on mission. And then when you're having to come back and say, actually, that's a really good idea. It's a really good enhancement or project or initiative or request. We just don't have the capacity or the budget to do that probably for the next 5 years. And and in somebody in your role, you feel as though that's kind of part of the job when you
Mhm.
said, sure, I'll be the transformational leader. I'll be the bad guy. What are some tips, advice you give to that second tier leader who feels that that's just not, it's not a tenable position to be in, to be the bad guy um, when you're out in the field having to answer to um, teachers, parents, community activists, press. Uh,
Yeah.
what are some tips that you gave your team that you could give to our listeners on that?
God, what a good question. Um, because it's not everybody can be the bad guy. Like that's not an organization
Ooh.
that is going to function. And so there are different roles that we're each playing. And I think that it's really important for me to take, as the leader, to take the pressure off of my team members for some of those core decisions that I make. And so it's really important as a transformational leader, if your decisions are going to impact core stakeholders, that you are the individual that owns those decisions and owns them publicly. It lets your team be more successful and it allows them to operate knowing that their stakeholders have seen you, the leader, own the decision and announce the decision, and it makes it easier for them to go out and manage it. I kind of want to flip your question a little bit
Okay.
because the camera's on and I can do what I want. But I think what's key in that hypothetical is, why is there not an alignment? And if the middle management is feeling like this is a key deliverable, a key stakeholder that no longer sees themselves within the business plan of the organization, there should be a conversation and there should be room for that discussion about, are we aligned appropriately? Are we going to meet the core mission? Are we missing something here with how we're moving forward? And so I always think it's really important to create that two-way conversation. Just because we've said that this is the way that we're marching doesn't mean that we don't have constant checkpoints of like, is this still working? What are our clients saying? What are our students saying? And so those are some things that I think are really important along the way. You can't move forward tone deaf to what some of your decisions are meaning, because it might be time to pivot and to adapt.
Yeah, I think I hear you saying two things. It's just I love the quote. Not everybody can be the bad guy. So it's my job as a senior leader, as the primary champion of a transformation, to create that air cover
Mhm.
to say that I'm going to be the one that represents our constraints and our tough choices. And number two, one indicator that I'm doing a good job of that is the degree to which we're having this dialogue at the top level and also at the tier two level about what it's going to take for us
Mhm.
to meet the objectives that we have. And if you, stakeholder, departmental leader, ambassador, are not aware of the tough choices that we're having to make and what the priorities are, then how would you be able to contribute to those priorities? And of course, you're going to be upset when your pet initiative isn't going to be prioritized. So I appreciate those two tangible things that number one, the transformational leader's job, but then also asking for help from your tier two leadership to engage in that dialogue and an expectation setting and negotiation um,
Mhm.
to get everybody on board. Okay, another one that came up that in our conversation, I got two more thoughts here. How do we know when it's time to leave? And we talked a little bit about this, that you saw some signs
Mhm.
in a number of your roles that said that as transformational as I have been and the impact that I have been able to mobilize through my team, it's time for someone else.
Mhm.
That is not a common thought pattern in a lot of transformational leaders to like, but nobody else is as transformational a visionary as I am. Why would I want to, why would it be, how could it possibly be a responsible thing for me to step away after the average tenure of 2 to 3 years?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a good question, and I didn't realize other people didn't think like that until you and I started talking about it. But for me, uh, you know, sort of foundationally, when one of my first what I would call transformational leadership experiences was when I was running the office of the director of Veterans Affairs for the District of Columbia. We built so much in such a short amount of time, but we had so much to do. We had to get good really, really quickly. And in that role, we built these like really great programs, built great partnerships. In about 2.5 years, I had really fixed all of the things that I said I was going to fix. And I was looking around, it's like, well, what's next?
Mhm.
And I didn't have anything. And also, in order to get to that point, I had to do a lot of internal advocacy. I had to do a lot of table pounding, all the things to do to get the resources to build the program. Message fatigue is the wrong word, but I think it
Wow.
made sense to me that I had built something that would outlast my tenure, and that it was really important for somebody else who would no longer have that frame of reference of foundation building and gap filling and everything that was endemic to where we were when we started, that they had a different perspective as soon as they came in, and they would be able to see a different vision for where the agency could go. And it was hard to let go. I distinctly remember that, but it was the right thing. And so those are some things like that was definitely one of the experiences of like somebody else can take this in a new direction, and that's okay. Um,
The
yeah.
reason that resonates so much with me is because the change champions that I work with and that I talk to, um, there's a friction between what I know to be possible, what and where we are today, and
Mhm.
there's always a difference. And what I hear you saying is that you have a different lens that than most change champions, as opposed to what is not necessarily what is possible, but there's now a new step between what is possible, what is a current state versus what should be the change.
Mhm.
And I think if I'm reading between the lines, that sure, at Veterans Affairs or at Parks and Rec or at DCPS, more was possible in the way of change, but not necessarily should be done. Is that fair? That if you wanted to like drag the entire department, agency, organization kicking and screaming to another level of change, that it could be done, but I remember the phrase diminishing returns.
Yeah.
At what point do we know that the juice isn't worth the squeeze?
No, I think that's fair. And I did say at a certain point, when you're implementing holistic change and you are working hard to reshape organizations, there does come a point at which returns start to diminish. And a part of that is, I do think that there's like this cycle of like really good catalyzing change that's foundational and important that can happen with a new and dynamic leader that sets a new tone. And then once you've reached that tone, it's about like, how do you take that next step? And what is the next step? And sometimes, in a lot of these roles, it's like, let's fix the foundation of this organization and chart a new course. But then simultaneously, sometimes you fix that and where you want to go can shift as well. You got to make sure that you're aligned to where those directions are headed. But for me, I get a lot of value out of like laying really strong foundations and transforming agency operations. And I'm okay with at a certain point, maybe it's okay for somebody else to come in and chart a course for like, we want to go to the right or to the left. Um,
Yeah.
and so you've got to, I guess, maybe what I'll say is, I don't think that the change ever stops. That delta never actually shrinks. And it doesn't matter how long you stay, there's always going to be some new evolution, some new adaptation that you can be working towards. And I think
Okay.
recognizing that you can't have a static organization and that change isn't just endemic to you as the leader, like, but you're creating a system that will outlive you where your people then can step forward and start adapting. So it's always hard to leave, but I don't feel that like strong hold that like everything's going to fall apart if I'm not here. I don't feel that way.
All right. Well, Eli, thank you so much for sharing some of your insights over your tenure. I think it's been a treat to watch you firsthand uh, make some of those changes myself, and then it's been a treat to chat with you through all of this. And I appreciate the time and energy you put into our chat today.
I really appreciate it. Always a pleasure.